Hello, and welcome again to the FLABOTA podcast. We try to break down issues that are facing the legal profession in today's world and trying to bring you guests that are going to add some insight, educate you, and try to help you understand what's going on in the legal world with all of us. And today couldn't have a more important person to have on this topic. We keep hearing about AI and its impact on the legal profession. And today, I am thrilled to bring to you Mr. John Garon, former Dean of NSU Law, author of Parenting for the Digital Generation, and overall guru on all things legal tech, and now, of late, AI. John, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. I just want to bring up that this podcast is brought to you by our FLABOTA sponsored Trilogy Trial Consultants for all your video production, trial presentation needs. Trilogy Trial Consultants. And this podcast is brought to you also by the Fort Lauderdale chapter of FLABOTA, and I'm FLABOTA President Jeff Adelman. Let's get right into it, John. We keep hearing about AI. Can you generally tell us when we keep hearing about AI, what are we talking about?
That's actually a great place to start, because there's a number of different kind of technologies that are all lumped into the label AI. And so we've been using artificial intelligence in the practice of law for many, many years, right? So if anyone who uses Westlaw and Lexis is using advanced algorithmic search, we have seen technologies help us extract data more and more effectively in e-discovery and other tools. What has really changed in the last year is the development of what's called generative AI, the ability of these large language models to start to talk to us in a natural voice. And so technologies like ChatGPT and others enable the software to be given a prompt, either text or voice, and respond with the writing of memos, information, documents, even drafts of legal products. And so it's that generative AI that's captured the most attention, but there are a host of legal issues for extractive AI as well as generative AI. And so it's important for lawyers to understand when they're using which, and to not overgeneralize when they're making, judges are making orders about what you can and can't do with AI.
Yeah, and I think have all heard about that story about the lawyer who let AI type out his brief and made up citations. So that's part of the danger if you're not actually manning the ship, right?
That's exactly right. One of the challenges of using generative AI is that it predicts what is a likely good next word or sentence or paragraph. It's not really tied to accuracy. And so if you ask it about a celebrity, it's going to tell you things about celebrities in general. And so it may make up facts about a particular individual, because overall, these are the kind of things that celebrities are talked about. Same thing with cases. It's really good at citation format, but that doesn't mean that it actually pulled information from a particular published case.
Exactly. And what are some of the things that legal practitioners should be excited about with AI? Because there's a lot of really positive things with this technology.
Absolutely. And so, although I think a lot of us are highlighting the risks associated with generative AI, you're absolutely right. There's plenty of use cases, and it is going to help make law firms more efficient, make lawyers quicker to do things. For someone who knows their content, let's start there, right? You're a senior attorney, you understand what you're doing. Generating quick first drafts to just get you started. The generative AI is a great tool to quickly knock out the frame, the structure, to give you a document that has the right format for the kind of legal document that you need, very much like using a form book, but it's even faster than that. And so that's an area where we use it a lot. Another area that is going to develop over time is combining what's called structured AI, preset answers, with the large language model. So it can interview pro bono clients, it can interview individuals that have low access to legal services, and be sure that all the questions are asked that need to be asked, and capture their answers and create a draft document that lawyers can then use to help them much more efficiently provide legal services. It's not a great tool for pro se litigants because they don't know how to check it, but for pro bono and other areas, it will greatly expand the tools that the lawyer has to be able to provide services to a broader group of clients.
That's a really good point. I had not thought of that, but for lawyers who work in pro bono type of jobs, obviously you still have to check over the work, but this really opens up a lot more possibilities to help more people that can't afford legal services.
That's exactly right. As an automated tool, it is best at repetitive activity. The more repetitive something is, the more you can fine tune it, the more efficient it becomes. And so in areas of addressing the tremendous unmet legal need, it can be really tuned to provide tremendous public service.
There's somebody who might be watching or listening and says, I don't want to mess with this AI stuff. I'm not interested. I'm not going to learn anything about it. I've been practicing law for decades without it. I'm going to continue doing that. How would you address somebody who had that mindset?
Again, it's very important to separate out the generative AI from the extractive AI. Generative AI is an efficiency tool. If you have a great form book, if you have automated your own documents, generative AI is going to have only marginal value. On the other hand, extractive AI, using AI tools to aid in discovery, massive document analysis, predictive analytics to look at the likelihood of outcomes of particular arguments that you might make in court, or quite frankly, to predict how different judges are going to respond to different arguments. Those are all tools that within the next few years, we're going to be finding lawyers deficient if they're not using those tools, because that's going to become the new standard.
Sort of like not using Westlaw or Lexis back
Exactly.
in the day to get the most updated cases. With these changes, I know that there's been some discussion about, the evidence code. The evidence code, I don't think, has been updated since the Jimmy Carter administration. Is the evidence code sufficient as it is to deal with this new technology?
We're facing an existential threat from synthetic media. Synthetic media is the term that we use for deep fakes and other technologies that create very hard to distinguish videos, audio files, and text files from work that originates from a real author. And of course, the evidence codes, you must have a foundation to put in evidence, but a lot of that has become streamlined because we assume that if it's coming from a particular place, it's likely to be accurate. So we've been struggling with evidentiary issues with all of social media and with all of the many, many different ways of putting documents, creating documents, and then having to rely on those documents in court for the last 5 or 10 years or more. Now, with the ability to generate perfect looking fakes, it is incumbent that there are new ways to authenticate. And so a thoughtful revision to putting humans in the middle, before we just assume that just because we found a document, it must stand for the proposition it stands for. On the other hand, there's also a concern that we're already starting to see where parties can simply say, any document might be fake, therefore I won't validate any document that I have, and increase the costs of litigation. That creates its own problems as well. So it's not just the synthetic media, it's also the ethics of the attorneys and the parties and how they must go about authenticating information.
With regards to, for example, a video, like a deep fake or something like that, is there a way to detect whether or not it's been altered? I mean, how expensive is it to go through that process?
This is really a technological arms race at the moment. So for every tool that has come out, some tech company has suggested that they have a way to analyze the deep fake, analyze the videos, and identify truth from fiction. But then the next iteration of tool has overcome those obstacles. So at this point, I am very reluctant to say there's a technological solution that can really effectively identify all the deep fakes. Again, it's to depend on how sophisticated the synthetic media was when it was created. But it's just going to go back and forth, and I would be reluctant to suggest that there's going to be a technological solution to this.
Are there any suggestions that, well, maybe that you have thought of for updating the evidence code to deal with some of these issues, or do you, what would you recommend be done to try and look into that?
I think at this point, the next step is really a process step. The states need to really think about bringing together experts from across multiple disciplines, right? So technology is one piece of this, the judiciary issues, but there's also cost consequences. And so we really need a lot of people at the table who are very thoughtful about the implications of evidence, how it affects mass expensive litigation, how it affects smaller litigation. It may be that the same solution is not universal. And so I think a very comprehensive set of perhaps conferences first, working groups to really work through the issues. I don't think sending it to committee and hoping for a quick draft is going to get us far enough.
It sounds like if anybody, any people are going into college right now studying computer science, becoming an expert in AI detection, it sounds like that's going to be a field in the next 5-10 years that's going to be valuable.
There's no question that artificial intelligence, all the different aspects of artificial intelligence are going to only grow in importance. Ironically, one of the things that generative AI is actually very good at is drafting code itself. So I think we're going to see a shift for those college students, perhaps away from writing code and requiring them to be more thoughtful on the other side. We're also seeing, because of AI, a huge spike in cybersecurity issues. The same technologies allow bad actors to weaponize more and more tools. And so we're going to see a huge growth in the need for cybersecurity experts and to become more defensive in how we operate all of our businesses, but that includes our law firms as well.
Yeah, some of the things that are in the news, has been weaponized against women putting their face on pornography. We've seen that. And also just, I was reading something the other day about the Ukraine war with propaganda showing President Zelensky telling his troops to put their weapons down. The Russians were using that as weaponizing propaganda. So it's very potentially dangerous for people.
Yeah, false flag operations like that are not new to warfare, but the sophistication has gotten worse and worse. So at the beginning of the invasion, Russia released the video that you're talking about. Just this last week, there was a series of social media posts attributing to famous US celebrities a call for the Ukraine to disarm and allow Russia in, all of which was fake. That was intended to lower political support for funding the Ukraine war by the United States. So we're seeing it at that level. As you said, the deep fakes targeting women has been a long-standing problem on the internet. Now we're seeing a new fraud, which is the use of deep fake videos to duplicate the voice of someone. And so these don't have to be celebrities. Grandparents have heard audio recordings that they think are their grandchildren. And so they get a phone call, and instead of it being some random voice, it actually sounds like their real grandchildren saying they're in jail, they need money, can they send gift cards so that they can use them to get out of trouble? And so these kinds of frauds are growing faster and faster.
How do those deep fakes on the voices work? Are those does that happen when people call and there's nothing on the other line and people are asking questions and giving their voice? Or how do they get the voice so that they can do some type of fraud like that?
So the initial voice file will likely come from a TikTok or YouTube video, right? So my voice now can be duplicated because anyone can pull it from this video and use this voice now for any telephones. It takes a very short clip at this point that is then processed, and the software then identifies the likely speech patterns of the individual. So from a 30-second clip on TikTok or YouTube, the computer can then generate the voice. The person, the fraudster speaks into the phone, it is filtered and comes out sounding like the grandchild. It is as simple as that.
Wow. So me doing this podcast is subjecting me to voice mimicking. So
absolutely
good to know. Now, I feel much better now. What can we do to protect ourselves and protect our clients from this new technology?
There is a long list of steps that lawyers should take, and citizens. So the first step for everyone is what I call digital literacy, right? We must become much better at identifying where we read what we read, where we watch what we watch, right? To be a little more cynical if we are not seeing something from a trusted source. So that's step one. And before we ever repost anything, even just social media, we have done that provenance check to make sure we are not part of the problem. Secondly, moving on to the lawyers, it's really important that lawyers do understand the limits of generative AI. First, the data sets are not necessarily up to date, and putting information into the data set, by which I mean writing a search that you upload, typing in the chat box, that is not a private interaction with that tool. Now, some commercially branded tools are increasingly providing confidentiality, but if you're talking about important client information, I would want a written contract that I can rely on if I have a duty. And very rarely, right, seeing an ad saying, oh yes, we're confidential is not nearly the same thing as a lawyer needs to have as confidentiality for the lawyer's client. That means that when you're asking questions, you are not providing confidential information that can then be searched by opposing parties, by third parties, and the like. If you represent a publicly traded company and you have material non-public information that you are sharing that way, now you have real Securities and Exchange Commission regulatory issues, and you may in fact do tremendous harm to your clients. Once you get the information back, you then need to vet it very carefully. Again, it's a very useful, quick drafting tool, but you should think of it as being written by a high school student. And so it's not a first-year associate, it's a high school student. And so it may have subject and verb in the right place, but it doesn't have actual knowledge of the law. And lawyers need to think about it that carefully.
You know, I'm going to touch on something you just mentioned, going into like trade secrets. We get, you know, sometimes confidentiality agreements. I'm seeing that more and more from the defense. Is this in part why? Because of the concern over AI getting a hold of the documents?
Certainly, that is a piece of it. I mean, more generally, trade secrets are becoming a bigger part of how one protects one's corporate assets. The internet makes managing copyrights and trademarks harder than ever. So much is duplicated. So trade secrets have become a much bigger part of the economy in the last 10 years. And so you're seeing that general trend. But yes, the enforceability certainly ties directly to the need to protect within the context of not uploading, not sharing into these databases, not uploading into an unprotected Dropbox or Google Docs folder that also is subject to third-party access. So recipient lawyers need to be much more aware of where information goes once they receive it from their clients or from the other side.
You wrote an article, The Revolution Will Be Digitized, Generative AI, Synthetic Media, and the Medium of Disruption. And I read through that before this interview. One of the cases I found fascinating was the Getty Images case. Can you talk to the audience a little bit about that case? Getty Images, for those of you who don't know, has images of just about everything out there to look at, and you can purchase those images online. It's probably the biggest image distribution company in the world, if I'm not mistaken. But there was a lawsuit that was involved with that, and you wrote about it. Would you mind talking about it a little bit?
No, happy to. So the Getty Images case was one of the first of what have now become probably a half dozen or more leading lawsuits challenging the use of generative AI in both text and in images. The Getty case is, in my mind, the strongest of all the litigation. First, because they do own the largest database of images, it is easier for them to identify the content that has been scraped or downloaded from the internet into the training models. And so from an evidentiary standpoint, they're in a better position than most other plaintiffs in terms of what's in the database. But secondly, they're claiming direct copyright infringement for the output of the images that are coming out of the software. And if you look at it is still in the evidentiary stage. The case has not proceeded that far yet. It's being brought both in the United States and in the United Kingdom. But those two cases are, as they're looking at the allegations of copying, you actually see images generated by the AI that look like the watermarks that are on the Getty photographs are simply blurred out. And so there is, right, as a first glance, there is probably the strongest example of where the output matches the input, which will meet our copyright substantial similarity test. So they're probably sitting in the position as the strongest of plaintiffs. They've also further strengthened their position because they have licensed their database to one of the AI companies in part, and that means that they are commercially exploiting this market. So if there was ever a claim of fair use, they can point to the fact that they are in fact an actual licensor, and therefore there is a direct market harm by having a non-licensed competitor in the marketplace.
Sure. So to those listening, watching out there, one of the things to protect yourself, it sounds like, limit what you actually post on social media. Is that something that is valuable. I know a lot of people probably won't stop, but there could be real repercussions for posting your videos out there, couldn't there be?
Well, certainly lawyers need to be very mindful, not just in the AI context, but across the broader set of duties for communicating with the public, right? You can use social media to connect with your own clients. You can use social media to connect with third parties, with opposing parties, advertising, and each one of those areas has its own rules of professional responsibility, guidance, and limitations. So there have been a number of opinions from various states on how lawyers need to think about how they communicate in general, and then specifically with individuals. And so that precedes the AI tools. Now AI on top of it means that when you post, there is always a risk that your posts are going to be turned into something you didn't intend. And since that's a known risk, it's something that lawyers have to at least consider when they're using social media in an otherwise appropriate manner.
Understood. Now, I see behind you the Parenting for the Digital Generation book that you've authored, and I know you're very proud of that. Can you tell us a little bit about your new book?
Sure. So that was actually originally started in response to the COVID-19 pandemic and the technological change that so many families found themselves with their children in online education, from preschool all the way through PhD programs. Suddenly the entire country was online. But it also highlighted this broader shift to the use of social media, the use of online tools, just across all of our landscape, right? You can't talk to a parent today who isn't concerned about screen time for their kids, about how to manage social media, online bullying and harassment concerns, addiction issues. And so the book really tries to identify each of these issues from the perspective of a parent and talk about, what is the real risk versus the hype? How much intrusion should the parent take? What strategies can a parent use to create a good balance? How to talk with your schools about online education, as well as how to have a good cybersecurity footprint at home so that your own files aren't subject to malware, to encryption, to loss and theft. And so it really tries to be a home user guide for everything that goes on in the online world.
Well, John, I can't thank you enough for being with us today. If anybody's interested in your book or getting in touch with you, how can they go about doing that?
Well, the book you can find in Amazon or educational bookstores. But for me, I'm at Nova Southeastern University, Shepard Broad College of Law. And so I'm easy to find at NSU, or you can find me on LinkedIn.
Well, that's terrific. Well, I want to give you an opportunity. Is there anything else that I have not asked you about today that you'd like to bring up before we conclude this talk?
I just want to go back to that first point that I made about digital literacy, right? This is not about the world becoming coarser or scarier. It's about having to have, as professionals and as public citizens, a much more open understanding of the communications that are going on online. Huge opportunities to connect with people, to build networks, to engage with the world around us, but also an obligation to be aware of what we're learning, how we're learning it. And so by focusing in on digital literacy and understanding, leaning into the technologies that we're seeing today, lawyers can do a great job for themselves and for their clients.
John, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. For everyone listening, this has been John Garon, and he gave his contact information before. For the FLABOTA podcast, I'm Jeff Adelman. I also want to thank my producer, Mitchell Chester, who I couldn't do this show without his help, so I'm very appreciative, Mitch. Until next time, I'm Jeff Adelman. Be well, everybody.
The preservation of the civil jury trial, also referred to as justice by the people, is the primary purpose of the American Board of Trial Advocates. We seek attorneys who display skill, civility and integrity, to help younger attorneys achieve a higher level of trial advocacy, and to educate the public about the vital importance of the 7th Amendment to the United States Constitution. Thomas Jefferson was of the opinion that the right to trial by a jury of fellow citizens was a more important safeguard of personal liberty than even the right to vote. With a jury, the rights and duties of each of us will be decided by our fellow citizens, not by a bureaucrat or governmental functionary. The American Board of Trial Advocates embraces this philosophy of Jefferson, and is a leader in the fight to preserve and protect the rights of every American to a jury trial. The organization is dedicated to justice by the people. For more information, contact us at abotaftl@gmail.com. The 17th Judicial Circuit, in a project advocated by the Fort Lauderdale chapter of the American Board of Trial Advocates, expanded use and access to the court's emergency alert system. You can register for email and text messages from the court about emergency closures and cancellations. To sign up, please visit the court's website at 17th.flcourts.org. This podcast was produced on December 8, 2023 by Jeff Adelman and Mitch Chester, for the Florida chapters of the American Board of Trial Advocates and the Fort Lauderdale chapter.